In the media, framing is anything. You could take something positive and make it sound negative if you say it in a certain way. And right now we have the story from CNN. Trump's approval rally has disappeared. Many stories have started popping up about Trump having his approval rating diminish or go down, or the lowest we've ever seen. I try to avoid individual polls. I don't always do it. Sometimes I use it because I think it's relevant. But typically I try to go by the aggregate polling, all of the polls together to see what's really going on. But of course, for political expediency, many news organizations claiming they're doing news will say, whoa, Trump's approval rating has tanked. But they don't talk about when his approval rating is at its all-time high. Or sometimes other people do, supporters of Trump, and they focus on one or two polls. I don't like doing that. This is just framing. People who like or oppose the president will claim things are better or worse. But the reality is things are really, really, really good for Donald Trump right now. Don't let the media stories convince you otherwise. If you're somebody who doesn't like the president, believing things are bad for him means you will lose in November. Take a look at this story from CNN. CNN says a new Gallup poll finds President Donald Trump's approval rating stands at 43%. His disapproval rating is 54%. Trump's approval rating is down significantly from 49% in March, while his disapproval rating is up 9 points. What's the point? Trump received a clear boost in his approval rating as the coronavirus pandemic began to grip the country. His net approval rating among voters shot up to its highest point since the first month of his presidency. But now, just weeks later, Trump's popularity has been dropping. Looking at the data, Trump seems to have had one of the fastest retreats of a rally around the flag effect in modern polling history. Trump's net approval rating stood at minus 10 points among voters in the aggregate polls as late as March 11th. Less than 3 weeks later, it got up to minus 4. Now, the important point that I want to bring up with this story, actually doing a fairly decent job of this analysis, pointing out aggregate polling makes more sense. But this is about Trump's approval rating started to go down the moment the news outlets stopped covering his rallies. And that's the important point. The media will frame things to make you angry or to make it look bad. And then when Trump actually talks about it, and when you see him actually say what he needs to say, then people actually like what he has to say. It's very important that the media control the narrative, especially if they want to try and shape things like we know they do. He says even at its peak, the jump of just 6 points is weaker than any well-known rally around the flag, yada, yada. I don't ultimately care for the most part. A lot of people are pointing out this Gallup poll, and I do think that Harry over here at CNN does a good job to bring up the aggregate, because when you look at the aggregate, you can see that although Donald Trump doesn't have the highest approval rating he's ever had, that peaked at around 47.4, it looks like, and that was just a week or so ago. We can see that currently Donald Trump in the aggregate is at 46%. Compare that to any point of his presidency, and he is higher than he has been on average in the past several years for the entirety of his presidency. I mean, his peak when he first got into office was just at 46. So you want to talk about the significance of these polls. That's fine. But the reality is Trump is doing really, really, really well. And they still try and frame things like it's really, really bad. Check this out. Trump's fundraising slows amid outbreak, still sets records. That's great context. Okay, I appreciate that. You can say it's slowing down, and this is fine, this is ABC News, but you got to be careful about how the pundits try and frame things. Are things good or bad for Trump? Well, there are some reasons to believe that things are kind of bad, but overall really, really good. They say President Donald Trump's record-setting fundraising pace has slowed slightly amid the coronavirus outbreak, but remains strong as he stays on track to top Democrats. I mean, look, compare Joe Biden's follower count and interest to Trump's, and it's just, it's not even there. It's like the difference between a human and an ant, okay? The height of a human versus the height of an ant. It's ridiculous. Joe Biden doesn't even exist on the map. Sure, he's raising some money. Bernie raised way more. Joe Biden has almost no internet followers relative to Trump. He's got like 6% of what Trump has. But also think about conversation. How many people care to talk about Joe Biden versus care about talking about Trump? Everybody and their mother wants to talk about Trump, not Joe Biden. So ABC says, Donald Trump's record-setting fundraising pace slowed. We read that. The Trump re-election campaign and the Republican National Committee raised more than $212 million in the first quarter of 2020, according to figures first obtained by the Associated Press, bringing their total to more than $677 million since 2017. Their haul for March, even as the nation's economy began grinding to a halt to slow the pandemic, was more than $63 million. Trump's base is more fired up than ever. You cannot say the same thing for Joe Biden. I'd be interested to see a Joe Biden victory just because who wants Joe Biden to be president? You've got a lot of people who don't want Trump to be president, but is that enough to fire up Joe Biden's support? No. We'll see how things play out. Right now, there's a story going around that even though the pandemic has slowed things down, Trump's actually still getting a lot of small donations from people, many of whom are out of work. Some people have called for Trump supporters to dump their Trump bucks into the Trump campaign. That would be a major, major boost. But I don't think Trump needs the money. I think right now, for the most part, people have really made up their minds. I guess there's some people in the middle that need to be convinced. I don't know. People on the left aren't going to just drop the orange man bad rhetoric. They're going to push whatever fake news they can, even though Trump's approval ratings are pretty good. And the people who support the president aren't necessarily going to be changing their mind. I think it's probably fair to point out the swing in Trump's approval really does have to do with the people who aren't entirely sure. The reason Trump's approval rating is below 50% is obvious. Democrats will never like him. So what's really starting to work for Trump is that, well, I should not say all Democrats, but most. With Trump and the coronavirus, he actually started gaining support from Democrats and from independents. The swings we're seeing in this aggregate here is probably from moderate voters because the Democrats have made up their mind. This graph, I believe, the whole aggregate for Trump is misleading. When we look at support for the president, when we look at support for the media, we can see that tribal lines have dictated everything. So if you were to compare Trump to Obama, I'd be willing to bet that Trump technically is a bit higher than Obama in a certain respect, meaning that Obama's aggregate polling did have tribalism involved, but you had a lot of people who were like, whatever. Today, it's orange man bad or nothing. They don't care about Joe Biden. They don't want to elect Joe Biden. It's literally just, is Trump good or bad? In which case, you have a lot of people who, no matter what, will say Trump is bad. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to vote. And Trump's base is bigger than it was when he got elected. So if Trump's favorability is static, which it is, and his approval rating is up, even if it goes down in the past week or so, I think Trump's on track to win, especially when you look at his donors. The important factor is when progressive pundits and the media run these stories like Trump's approval rating has taken a hit, like you take a look at this CNN story. And while it's not the worst thing in the world, they do lead with the Gallup poll saying Trump is doing bad. They say his rally has disappeared. And I guess it's fine if you want to report on the short term of what happened with his rally. But you got to look at the aggregate. I think it's more important to tell people that Trump's doing better than ever. If you only ever get pundits, progressive or people in the media saying Trump just did bad, they really do just believe everybody hates Trump and it's worse than it's ever been. There's a viral tweet that I see all the time where someone said, can we all just admit that the experiment to have a real estate TV mogul, a reality star as president isn't working out and things are really bad, something like that. And it's funny to me because this person is clearly only getting passive information from those who frequently write about how bad Trump is doing. The truth matters. So I'll put it this way. That tweet that goes viral, people really believe things are worse than they've ever been. Meanwhile, we had a record economy up until the coronavirus. So here's what happens. You have media companies that want to write the negative because they know negative gets clicks. They argue that I simply want to write the negative about Democrats because it gets clicks. I would say it's true that much of my content is critical of Democrats, but I have actually praised and given respect to Cuomo and Bill de Blasio amid the coronavirus pandemic for trying to do what their best. I am very critical of the Democrats. And this does create a problem in basically both directions. If you only watch my stuff and see me and me talking about how I feel about Democrats, you'll probably think Democrats are in the gutter doing the worst possible, they could ever have done. But as I am frequent to point out, I was wrong in 2018. They ended up winning. I didn't think they would. One thing I missed was that the moderate Democrats were going after Trump supporters with moderate policy. Today, the point I'm trying to make is be careful about what you watch, even if it's just my stuff. The Democrats right now are convinced Trump is losing because CNN and the Washington Post and these outlets only tend to write negative. So the perception people have of Trump is that he's doing really, really bad and things are really, really bad. But if you actually look at the hard numbers, Trump is doing well. Now, as much as I will be self-critical and say that I often rag on Democrats, I think I'm actually right. Of course, they think they're right too, but I have data to back it up. If Donald Trump today's his approval rating is higher than it was a couple months ago, then it stands to reason Trump is doing well. If he's getting less donations because of the pandemic, but still breaking records, it stands to reason he is doing well. And the American people like what he's doing. That's the side I'm on. So as much as I'll criticize the other side, I think I'm based on the facts. They certainly think they are too, and technically they're right. But I'm not going to call out anyone specifically, but I've seen progressives put out stories like Trump's highest disapproval of all time, the worst, and they're like, wow, Trump's doing so bad, this is so terrible. But if you show someone one poll and ignore all the rest, you're not painting a full picture. And then people are going to think they're on track to win, and they're not, and they're going to lose. Here's what I'm trying to say. You know, what's the saying about stupid people being confident and smart people being so full of doubt? I think there's reasons to criticize the stuff that I do because I'm playing a similar game that they're playing. But I'm willing to look at the hard data. So I think the reason I'm on one particular side of this is because the facts are on my side. If you're willing to watch me, you're more likely to see the aggregate picture, the bigger picture, pulling back to seeing how Trump is doing, and he's doing really well. But if you were to be like one of these regular people who just passively watches CNN, you'd only assume then that Trump is on track for defeat. And he's not, because you're not getting the big picture. You're not understanding what's really going on. So the main reason I wanted to do this is because I'm sick and tired of seeing this Gallup poll. Everybody keeps saying, you know, the Gallup poll, Trump's worse than ever. And I've had some people ask me like, why won't you talk about Trump's worst polling? And I'm like, this is it. It's one poll. Give me a week. We'll see how the aggregate turns out. And right now there's no news. It's not news that Trump's approval rating isn't as high as it's ever been, but it's still higher than it was over the past several months. Like, what do you want to be said about it? Long story short, even when they try and point to a negative, even when they try to attack the president, he's still doing better every day. It really is. You got to look at how the aggregate plays out. As much as Trump does have ups and downs, he is trending upward. I'll leave it there. I guess you get the point. The media frames things. They want you to be convinced that there's a world where Trump is losing, but he's not losing. I got a couple more segments coming up for you in a few minutes, and I will see you all shortly.